I am so sick and tired of the shills out there acting like there's not a problem at DC Comics. I go through every single month, I look at the comic book sales, and yes, sometimes there is a bit of an upswing in the top 50 list. But I've never seen what I'm going to talk about today, a complete bottoming out of the lower echelon of DC Comics that they're putting out there. Over half the comic books DC produced in July of 2022 fell outside the top 100. And shockingly, they had a handful of titles fall outside the top 200. You can't keep ignoring this stuff. It's literally staring you right in the face. There's a problem with DC, yet everyone wants to keep making excuses for it. They are intentionally, when I say they, I'm talking about the editorial teams and the writers, they are intentionally tanking these characters because they think they have carte blanche, because they can go in and do whatever they want. They're doing all these mantle swaps, they're doing sexuality changes on all these characters, and guess what? People are summarily rejecting all of it. Today I was supposed to do the analysis video for all of July of 2022 when it came to comic books, but the reality staring me in the face in the dead titles walking portion of the comic book revolution comic book sales charts, it was so bad I had to do a video solo on it, so we will look at the rest of the sales tomorrow. But this is so urgent, it needed to be talked about today specifically. Let's get into some of these numbers. Your mind is about to be blown. I was depressed when I got done reading this. It's incomprehensible just how badly DC Comics have fallen since Future State happened. Every single month, there are going to be Marvel and DC Comics falling outside the top 100. Marvel Comics specifically has 12 comic books placing outside the top 100, which is pretty good considering Marvel Comics produce significantly more new comic books on a monthly basis than DC. But when I got to the DC list, I couldn't believe it. 29 DC Comics are ranked outside the top 100. 52% of everything DC produced and released in July of 2022 fell below the dead titles walking threshold. This is absolutely mind-blowing that this could happen, and DC Comics are making so many mistakes. We're actually seeing Batman comic books, led by Bruce Wayne specifically, on this list. And what's even more surprising is the amount of comic books they had placed outside the top 200. Normally, you wouldn't expect to see anything from Marvel or DC in this neighborhood. Yet DC Comics somehow managed to produce 8 comic books that sold outside of the top 200. Outside the top 100 is bad. Outside the top 200 is double dead title walking, if you know what I mean. Obviously, there is a Looney Tunes title in there, so we can kind of ignore that one. That's not really associated with DC Comics superheroes. But everything they produced that was Aquaman related was outside the top 200. Young Justice, another franchise you wouldn't expect to be this low, also outside the top 200. Brian Michael Bendis' Naomi. That thing was so enormous, they made a TV show about it. Outside the top 200. A Wonder Woman comic book outside the top 200. And it has a lot to do with the creators. When you look at these things, Aquaman and Flash Voidsong, Jackson Lanzig, Colin Kelly, Aquaman, Brandon Thomas, Young Justice targets Greg Weisman, who normally in the past has actually sold. That one is really surprising. Naomi Season 2, Brian Michael Bendis, Wonder Woman Evolution, Stephanie Phillips, Blood and Syndicate Season 1, Jeffrey Thorne, coming off of that terrible Green Lantern run, and then Duo from Greg Pak. There are so many pundits out there that are making excuses for DC Comics, but the proof is in the pudding. You just saw it. And actually, there's another comic book on the list that I'm not sure why it isn't in there. At number 160 is Artemis Wanted, which is the conclusion of the big Trial of the Amazon event that was supposed to be the big Wonder Woman event, which was absolutely destroyed because of inept creators. But DC Comics keeps hiring these people. Why are they continuing to hire Clunrad? Michael Conrad, Becky Cloonan. Batgirl sitting at number 107 is Clunrad. Wonder Woman 789, a Wonder Woman comic book sitting at number 130 by Clunrad, and yet they're still on the title. And they worked on a major event in the not too recent past. Absolutely shocking what DC Comics will accept as far as failure these days without getting rid of your ass. Recently, I saw there was an interview with Brian Michael Bendis talking about his time at DC Comics, and he was kind of bragging. He's like, yeah, I did a great thing. We were just over the moon with the performance of Justice League versus Legion of Superheroes. Well, guess what, buddy? Sitting in at 117, it isn't performing. And Naomi, your new big character in the DC Comics universe that everyone thought was popular for no reason, definitely not based on sales, is outside the top 200. The Brian Michael Bendis time at DC Comics was such an enormous failure. They gave him Superman. I wonder why Superman can't sell right now. Obviously, they've made some very daring decisions creatively with the Superman titles, making John Kent the lead on Superman, Son of Kal-El. doing a sexuality swap with the character, which certainly didn't help things, but Action Comics is still starring Clark Kent, and it's outside the top 100. Something that was absolutely unfathomable 2 years ago, but DC Comics apparently was a house of cards and is just blowing apart right now. There's such a disconnect between DC Comics and their customers right now. I don't know that they can get things back. Look at all the crazy deconstructed takes that they're doing on characters. Batman the Fortress from Gary Whitta. This stars Bruce Wayne in a Batman miniseries. Almost always guaranteed me in the top 50. It would be surprising to see this thing actually drop out of the top 50. That would be surprising. Batman the Fortress number 3 sits at 153. Shocking that people didn't like the weird deconstructed take of Gary Whitta on Batman, where he's out there essentially supporting Antifa and going, you know what? Those rioters, there's insurance to cover that. I would never stop that type of crime, and people just dropped it immediately. DC Comics are heavily leveraged on bad creators like Vita Ayala, who they brought in through the Scott Snyder new creators program that they had. And apparently it doesn't matter what Vita Ayala does. In fact, Vita Ayala, despite not selling any comic books, just gets to bring her friends in now. What's one of the friends she brought in? Danny Lore, who got the Multiversity Teen Justice series, which essentially consists of 9 LGBTQ female characters arguing with each other for 24 pages. Not surprising that lands outside of the top 170. Who else does she get to bring in? Stephanie Williams, apparently a protege of hers, working on those Nubia Queen of the Amazon series and whatnot. Well, now she gets to run solo. On Nubia Queen of the Amazons, sits right at 175. Vita Ayala herself got the Artemis Wanted one-shot that was the end of the Trial of the Amazons, as I mentioned, at number 160. But these creators will continue to get work. Why? I don't know. Maybe it's because they check special boxes and DC Comics would rather be inclusive when it comes to bad creators than put out good product when it comes to their customers and have any type of satisfaction with them. The people have spoken loud and clear. They don't want what DC Comics are offering. They certainly don't want a few things that Marvel are offering, but that's normal. That's pretty healthy. You're going to have winners and losers in the comic book industry. You don't expect DC Comics to have 52% of their comic books be losers in a given month. The fact that they produced 4 new Wonder Woman associated comic books in the month, and every single one of them dropped outside of the top 130. Wonder Woman is an enormously popular, important comic book character. These sales are beyond shocking at this point. It's completely unsatisfactory. This is why we're seeing what we're seeing from David Zaslav. He's going in there and he's seeing the incompetence across the board, not just with DC Comics. Obviously, that's not going to be his main concern, but with DC Films and stuff. Because there's this stupid, weird agenda that's going in there and it's absolutely costing them money every single month. There's no way you should have Batman titles on this list. I Am Out Batman, Jace Fox as Batman. Apparently, Dan Didio wanted a black Batman. Shockingly, people still don't like mantle swaps, no matter if you had the most altruistic intentions in the world. Nobody wants these things. What are DC Comics going to do? These numbers, this list is absolutely shocking. And anyone with half a brain can't deny that there's a problem with DC Comics itself. There's something rotten at the heart of the core. It's the editorial staff. I'm telling you, go out there and check out Chris Conroy. Go look at his social media. Go see his Twitter. See how insane this guy is. And he is a group editor at DC Comics. The fact that he and the other people within the DC office can't see that every single title you put Stephanie Phillips on ends up bottoming out to sales numbers you didn't think fathomable. Look what happened to Harley Quinn. This is one of the most popular mainstream breaking characters that DC Comics have. Harley Quinn is popular. There's a fan base there. And they can't sell the comic book because Stephanie Phillips is a notoriously terrible comic book writer. She got the Wonder Woman Evolution series. By the time it's over, outside the top 200. How many free passes are these creators going to get? How many free passes are these editors going to get where they completely mess up the universe? They hire these people that are unqualified, do not fit within the DC Comics universe. They go in and they destroy everything. They go, well, you just must be misogynist. You just don't like female writers. You just don't like female heroes. You just don't want a black Batman. That must mean you're racist. No, I just want Bruce Wayne. I want the real Batman. There's an alternative Batman. His name's Batman Beyond. Terry McGinnis. I am so sick and tired of the shills out there denying the reality that's staring them in the face. That's why people like this channel. That's why people come here for comic book information, because they know it's all real and no shill whatsoever. Because I can only tell you how it is. DC Comics has enormous problems. If they didn't have Batman, I don't even know what to think. They would essentially be a dead brand competing with Image Comics to be the number 2 brand in superhero comics in America. There is something wrong with DC Comics, and it can't be fixed until probably Jim Lee goes. He's probably the biggest reason that this is happening, because when Dan Didio was there, he had terrible ideas, but at least he was a leader, and he could recognize when you had bad people, and he would try and get rid of them. That is not the case anymore. If you're a shitty writer, get your foot in the door at DC Comics. They will not stop giving you projects no matter how bad you fail. That's why Tini Howard's over here. That's why Vita Allen's over here. This is why Matthew Rosenberg has moved over to DC Comics. And the list goes on of failed comic book creators that couldn't sell more than 12,000 copies of a comic book on their best day. This is what DC Comics has become. Unless they're willing to admit they have a problem, it's never going to get better. Terrible creative decisions by editorial and creators that shouldn't be there in the first place have essentially killed every single character outside of Batman. I had this conversation with Josh. We really ran them all down and talked about why every single thing has been destroyed at DC Comics.